very much for that introduction. Don't think I need the microphone, but it's here anyway. Those of you who know me know that I talk at a pretty brisk pace, so I'm going to do my best to try to slow it down slightly. I've spoken many times in the past. It hasn't yet once happened, so I'll give it a try. So today, it's going to be very difficult, but we're going to do the best that we can to try to follow through from this morning's presentation and panel, which was really spectacular. And if that was the beginning, this is certainly going to be a great continuation. I have no doubt in my mind about that. The conversation we're going to have today is about editorial data analysis on the editorial side of our business. What I'm going to do is introduce each of our panelists, talk a little bit about Magnet and what we do, and then each of the panelists will talk about what they do at their organization and their role as it relates to deciding what goes on the covers of the magazines that they manage. We have Syd Evans, editor-in-chief of Southern Living magazine. You may have heard of him from last night. Liz Vaccarello, from editor-at-large at Reader's Digest magazine. Brooke Bell, director of editorial operations at Hoffman Media. Hubert Bull, CEO of Bauer Media, who you saw earlier today as well. And Joshua Ellis, editor-in-chief of Success magazine. So a little bit about Magnet and what we do. We were formed in the year 2000 by the major wholesalers at that time, focused on the newsstand side of the business. Started basically as a giant data collection house, sort of this place where we try to absorb as much data and information as we possibly can. Those of you who know me know that I will take, absorb, bring in, manage, house, do anything we possibly can with as much newsstand-related data as we can possibly get our hands on, or any other data set that might help us better manage the newsstand. Those of you who know me know that I collect a tremendous amount of magazines, not nearly as many as Samir, but certainly trying to catch up as quickly as I can. Matter of fact, I brought with me today a few of my personal favorites. I did this last year when we were speaking here at the Act 5 conference, just to sort of give you an idea and flavor of some of the things that we see on the newsstand. There are a lot of really interesting new ideas that are coming up. I brought a couple of things that I found over the past year that I really thought were worthy of bringing up and having a quick conversation about. I'm going to leave them on the table here for you to take a look at, and I'm happy to talk about any of them in detail. We had a conversation earlier, it was mentioned about having people that want to look at magazine covers for 4 minutes. I'm more like 4 hours, and we can really go through that level of detail. And I'm going to just point out one of them that I thought was really, really interesting. And if you can see this one, not that this is my personal favorite magazine, it's just a fantastic cover. I don't know if you all can see this. It's a 3D holograph. So if this doesn't grab somebody's attention, I don't know what does. So anyway, I'm going to leave these on the table, and you guys can take a look at that as well. So as I said, formed by the major magazine wholesalers in the year 2000, basically we started out as a data management and aggregation firm just specifically on the newsstand side of this business. We are recognized as the only central sales data repository in the business, collecting a tremendous amount of data, make most people's heads spin. We expanded into newsstand services and consulting. We do a lot of things on behalf of publishers, not only on the circulation side, but in a variety of other places within publishing shops, which we'll get to. Also expanded into IT development, as you can imagine. With all the data we receive, we have a pretty robust IT department with a lot of very, very smart individuals, a lot of very powerful hardware, both hosted and in the cloud. We do a lot of things with, so we also have a department that just deals with IT services. Have relationships with nearly every major publisher, every national distributor, every major consultant, wholesaler, and many, many retailers. We're very much in the middle of the newsstand business in pretty much every way you can imagine. We also scan covers and track sales on about 4,000 unique magazines. We get deliveries from a variety of wholesalers, including our friends at TNG, deliver magazines to our office, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, and we scan the cover of about 4,000 different magazines, and we index them in a variety of different ways. We tag subject categories, themes, personalities, frequencies, paginations, size, dimensions, pretty much any way we can possibly imagine to be able to track the magazine cover performance from the physical product itself. We are capturing in our database so that we can do much more advanced analytics. And then we also, using this data and using the scans that we have, we do provide editorial services for publishers. So as I was saying, not only on the circulation side, but we spend a lot of time on the editorial side helping publishers understand how best to maximize their opportunity and their profitability on the newsstand. Other things that we do, we launched an application about a year ago called Mag Finder. It's a national application for being able to find where magazines are available at newsstand. And it's a mobile-first application, works specifically about going around, and wherever you happen to be, it will use your GPS location on your phone. Oh, and you're not seeing it because oh, hold on. Let's see if I can bring this up. Oh, I can't. Well, I can show it to you later. It's a national application for finding magazines at retail, and it's a really neat application. If you ever want to try to support the newsstand, it's a really great way to do it. So publishers have been putting links to MagFinder on their websites, putting it out on Twitter, and putting it out on Facebook and other places to try to continue to support the newsstand and helping consumers find what magazines are available at any time. So, that's the introduction from the magnet side. I'm going to start with Syd Evans and ask him to give us a couple of minutes talking about his role specifically at Southern Living as it relates to cover treatment and editorial decisions for the cover of the magazine that you produce.
Okay, thanks, Josh. As editor-in-chief of Southern Living, we've got 12 covers for the regular magazine every year, and I'm deeply involved in all of those. We also have 14 bookazines that we produce. So basically, I'm making a decision on a cover pretty much every couple of weeks. I also oversee Cooking Light and Coastal Living in the role of group editor. So I'm looking at all of their covers as well. So I'm in a constant cover dialogue, constantly thinking about them, planning them, working on cover lines, and trying to improve them and connect with consumers in as immediate a way as I possibly can. I thought I would say just a couple things about a Southern Living cover and what goes into it, what we think about when we are making a decision about what we're going to do. And my predecessor at Southern Living was a guy named John Floyd, who was there for close to 20 years. He did a phenomenal job as the editor. He was very research-oriented, very focused on the consumer, and spent a lot of time on covers and did some great ones. But John had a kind of mantra that I have adapted, and there were three things that he thought should go into a Southern Living cover. First of all, it had to be seasonal. Seasonality is hugely important for Southern Living. People celebrate the seasons in the South. They look forward to it. And so the cover really needs to project that seasonality in a very authentic way. It's got to feel like spring, it's got to feel like summer, it's got to feel like fall. And if that doesn't come through, it typically will not sell very well. So there are lots of different interpretations of what seasonality means or what it looks like, and we have those discussions all the time. But it's very, very important in making our cover decisions. Second thing is it needs to be servicey. So that means that there needs to be a promise. It needs to be delivering something that people want immediately, something actionable, something they can take away. So they need to be able to make that recipe. They need to be able to decorate their home, get the decorating tips from that image. It needs to be something that they can act on right away. And that is absolutely critical, that there is a promise in the issue, and we are going to deliver on it. And we make that promise on the cover. So that's the second S, is service. And the third is Southern. It's got to be Southern. Something about that cover has to feel Southern. You know, we are a mass magazine. We compete against other mass magazines. We compete against a bunch of other women's lifestyle magazines. There are lots and lots of magazines that do food covers. There are lots of magazines that do garden covers and home covers. The difference is, for us, it needs to feel somehow like this is Southern. And, you know, again, that's something that is very debatable. We talk about it all the time. It's not something you can necessarily put your finger on. But when a cover doesn't produce, when it doesn't sell, sometimes we can blame that. We can say, you know what? This felt like it could have been Better Homes and Gardens. This didn't look like Southern Living. It wasn't unique. So that's really critical. And then there's kind of a fourth one that I've added. And that is, it needs to feel soulful. For me, something that feels soulful means there's an emotional connection there. And it usually has something to do with there being a story behind it. So, you know, it's not just a cake. There's actually a story behind that cake, and there's something that sort of connects with people on an emotional level. Or, you know, maybe it's a little girl on a swing in a front yard, which is like a cover that we did last July. And there was just something that made you want to be there, and it had a kind of soulful quality to it that I think put it over the top. And this cover, which I think we can show you later, actually won an award from ASME. So those are some of the things that we think about when we are creating covers. That's the direction that I will give my edit team and my art team. And we are also constantly looking at research. We're 50 years old, so we look at our history. We have a room where we have all the covers on the wall, and we can go back and we have the numbers and how much they sold, and we can look back and see how they performed. But the past is not always a guide. You know, you have to create things that are new and fresh, and that are going to bring in new consumers. I'll stop there, but that's a little bit of how we come up with a Southern Living cover.
Well, that's perfect, and I'm going to bring up the cover that we were discussing. These are the ones that we were discussing about. If you want to talk about that now before we get into it, some of the covers that you wanted to make up and spend a few minutes talking about.
Sure, I can do that. So, well, the cover I was mentioning that I thought had a kind of soulful quality to it is the one on the right. We actually, you know, said the soul of summer, just in case that soulfulness wasn't clear. And, you know, we sort of debated this. I mean, this is not a typical Southern Living cover. It's not a predictable Southern Living cover. It's not something where there's an immediate action. You know, there's not a cake that you can go home and make that night. But for us, there was a quality to it. It had a kind of magic about it that we thought would resonate, and it did. It surprised us, and I think it surprised our consumers, and it performed really well for us on the newsstand. And then we also got a nice nod from ASME. So that was a great win. The cover in the middle, I did want to mention, and this will maybe we get into this discussion later, but about 2 years ago, we started doing flip covers twice a year. So we do one in March and we do it in September, and it's a special 25-page section that you can flip the magazine over, and it has a celebrity cover, and there's 25 pages of style and beauty content. Now, the important thing about this is, first of all, this is bonus content for the reader. So We wanted it to be clear that we are not taking away anything that you love about Southern Living. This is a bonus. This is extra. And we've always projected that with these, so that's been critical. They, in some cases, have been helpful to us on the newsstand. This cover in particular performed really well with Jennifer Garner. And we saw a nice spike. I think it drives, it attracts a younger audience, a slightly different audience for Southern Living. It brings in people who might not have normally picked it up. So that's been really good. And then, you know, we also, it's been very successful on the advertising side. You know, there are certain advertisers who are interested in that celebrity cover. And it's brought in a lot of new business for us that's made a real difference. And then the final thing is just PR. You know, we get a big bang out of these things, PR and digital. We get a lot of nice pickup and exposure when we have a celebrity like Jennifer Garner, like Reese Witherspoon, like Jenna Bush and her sister. And that turns into significant web traffic for us. We always shoot videos when we're doing these cover shoots. So that's something that we've been doing for a couple of years that's been very successful, and I expect will continue. I talked a little bit last night about the anniversary cover. You know, we did 4 consecutive covers. We improved the cover stock for this issue. This was a thematic thing where we had 4 different covers that related to one celebration. We wanted to tell the story that the 50th anniversary of Southern Living was a massive celebration. And this is how we did it. It led to a big party inside. But the point that I wanted to make about this is that we are really trying to be as inventive and creative as we possibly can with our covers, not just in what we put on them, but in the different ways that we format them. So doing things like the flip cover, doing multiple covers, doing gatefold covers. I feel like there's been a lot of interest from marketers in being part of dynamic cover units. And as long as you don't cross a line, and as long as you don't do something that your consumers aren't going to like, then I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And in this case, we had Dillard's was the advertiser, and we were able to bring 4 covers to our readers, which was something that was really special for them. So we're looking for opportunities to do things like that whenever we can.
Perfect. All right. So next we'll go back and we'll go to Liz from Reader's Digest.
Thank you. Oh, good. You have my slides up there. So last year was a very good year for Reader's Digest, but what I want to do, and I think that's why Samir invited me here, and Josh is excited to talk about our newsstand numbers, but I want to go back 2 years to talk about the evolution of the Reader's Digest cover and sort of how we got there. In its heyday, we were one of the top selling magazines. You know, 250,000 is the new 1 million in terms of newsstand sales for Reader's Digest and for many magazines like us. But it's interesting to think about, I was brought in to reimagine the brand, reimagine the magazine for a modern age. And frankly, candidly, to solve for a consumer marketing problem that we had. For many years, the company had struggled and had not invested in consumer marketing. And so we had not marketed to a new generation of readers. Many people, because of bankruptcy several years ago, and many people in this room, the first thing they'll say to me is, I didn't know Reader's Digest was still in business. So we had, you know, my mother got, everyone knows, 99 out of 100 Americans knows what Reader's Digest is, feels fondly, positively about the magazine, but they didn't know it was still around. Our newsstand presence was strong, but not as, we weren't everywhere. We weren't in everybody's doctor's office. So I had to do something to both to get the attention of our core group of subscribers, as well as find new readers, new people who wanted to read stories of lasting interest. So one of the major things that we did was redesign the cover. And this is the last year of covers. I wanted to show 2014 because 2014 we saw a 16.1% increase in year-over-year newsstand sales. And in 2015 it's 12.1%. But because of the source interlink debacle in 14, nobody can trust those numbers. So nobody wanted me to put those slides up. But we had 2 years of a strong story. And can you move to the next slide, Josh? So here's the evolution of the magazine. We're a 93-year-old magazine, and for the first 40 years or so, it was the table of contents on the cover. Readers, you knew what Reader's Digest was. It was a place to read a bunch of stories. We had DeWitt Wallace had curated, had read all of the magazines and newspapers, so you didn't have to. And that worked very well. In 2000, after DeWitt and his wife passed away, there were a series of editorial changes, and the magazine, because it was selling so briskly at newsstand, it was trying to sell even better at newsstand, and sort of lost its way a bit and tried to become a general interest magazine. If you look at those covers from the early 2000s and even late 2000s, it was dabbling in celebrity, it was dabbling in women's service, the cover lines, the look of the magazine, tried to compete with other things that were at the main line. But that stopped working when everything stopped working, right? And so one of the work that we did, and it took us about a year to talk to subscribers, to talk to people who knew about the magazine but didn't get it, who used to get the magazine, couldn't find it anymore, et cetera, was we were never going to, while we cover both heartwarming stories, we have humor, we have service, we have food and health stories, we weren't going to appeal to that broad general interest, that person who wanted to make a hummingbird cake. That person had a food magazine, was probably going to engage with a different brand at newsstand. And we decided that the best strategy was to remind that person who liked and knows Reader's Digest that we were still around, and that we were a place for reading. So we wanted to update and modernize the table of contents cover strategy to show the curation. And in this example, I'll show you some examples later. This example has sort of a modern grid approach to that list of stories. We eventually wound up going with more of a longer, more easy to read list on the cover. And this did two things. This reminded people that you had stories in the magazine, and it also showed the curation. It also said, in this day and age, when the need for curation, the need to save time has never been greater, we've gone to Mashable and BuzzFeed, and we've read Business Insider, and we've read Southern Living and Garden and Gun, and we've found the stories, a nice mix, the stories of lasting interest that matter to you most. So that mix of curation is now an important part of the cover strategy. The logo became more important than almost anything, so we spent a lot of time redesigning it. And at the last minute, we decided to do something even more creative, if you will, with the idea of reading. And we created an actual bookmark for the cover. So that where the word digest ends is where the cover bookmark ends. So this now has a perforation, and it's been sponsored now very successfully by Geico, and you can tear this out and use this as your bookmark in the magazine. So that's why digest is a little flush left and ends where it ends. We had some printing limitations that made us have to end it at that particular spot. And so the color block became our main strategy for getting attention. We wanted to go with a very strong color every month. We've used metallic inks. This was actually a silver ink on the cover. And we've used bright primary attention-getting colors so that what you're doing is you're seeing the colors getting your attention, maybe the big line is getting your attention, but the words Reader's Digest are getting your attention. So if you've moved to Florida and you're at that Florida grocery store chain and you see that Reader's Digest, oh my goodness, I have to have that again. So that's the strategy there. We worked on color blocks, logo, the mix of curation. Can I see the next slide? Okay, so this shows you some of our best covers, and I thought I'd tell you some of the other factors that go into. We've sort of maintained a pretty strong, in the 200,000 range sell-through. But there are specific reasons for why each of these covers sold well, and I'll start with September 14 on the left. And this goes to a part of our cover strategy that I call, what's the emotional lever that you're pulling? So with Reader's Digest, there are several emotional levers. You saw that firefighter in the previous slide. That's the patriotism emotional lever, the human interest. The genius issue on the left, and my goodness, could that big cover line be any smaller? It says genius issue so small, but again, it's about the cover, it's about the logo, and it's about that mix of stories that pulls that lever that says, if I buy this magazine, I'm smarter just having purchased this magazine. You see, we have Malcolm Gladwell, we have curation from the New Yorker, we have a Mensa quiz, we have all sorts of words and promises in that language that say you're going to be a little smarter for having bought Reader's Digest. And we know because of our research that that's one of the reasons people have Reader's Digest in their home. It makes them feel as if they know the world a little better. So that was one of our only, since the redesign, single topic issues, and it did very, very well for us. Breaks all sorts of women's service cover rules, doesn't it? It breaks almost all of them. But I think because it breaks them, it got the attention from the audience that was going to buy Reader's Digest anyway. June 15 is an example of two things that we know do very well for us now on the newsstand. One has to do with food, but not cooking, and not necessarily nutrition. With Reader's Digest, the emotional lever that we pull is that's surprising. We found what doctors don't want you to know, the secrets nurses won't tell you. When it comes to our two biggest sellers in the last couple years have been what supermarkets don't want you to know, and this was what food manufacturers won't tell you. So that was one thing. We know when we get to food and the consumerism around food, that does well for us. The second part had to do with PR. So rather than, I've had other jobs where we would have editors, or I would go on the Today Show or the Good Morning America several times a month as sort of a regular expert, thinking that this would get these consumers to run out and buy magazines at the newsstand. Well, now there's a parade of magazine editors who are on these morning shows, and nobody watches a show anymore and then runs to the newsstand and buys that magazine. So those days were over. So now we're much more strategic about our public relations, and we will pick one or two issues out of the year, and in 15 it was this issue. And we partnered with CBS Early Show, or CBS This Morning rather, and we gave them the exclusive on this story. So I went on, and it was the day that it came out on newsstand. They were the only outlet that have it. They made a big deal about it because I wasn't on every month. I'm only on a couple times a year. So September 15 is another example of is an example of health being one of the strong content areas that Reader's Digest has permission to live in. We have long-standing heritage in a column called News from the World of Medicine. The brand was one of the first news organizations to uncover that smoking is deadly, and DeWitt Wallace in the 40s did a big piece on car crashes. So health and consumer safety is a big part of what the brand stands for. And as we know, and in a former life I was the editor of Prevention, health sells very well. So I have now brought health and wellness to at least 2 or 3 of the 10 covers every year. So that's
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So how do you pick that image for Your Body is in Big Trouble?
That's actually one of the interesting things that I plan on talking about this one a little later, so I hope you were ready on that one, because I have several questions on that one in particular.
So we'll talk about it later?
And now.
And
now too.
Why did I pick that image? Well, there were a couple of sort of newsstand rules. One of them was the eye lock. We wanted to, what we do is first of all, we map out our color scheme throughout the year. I sit down, the process is I work with the art department, and we have creative storyboards on all of the cover concepts for the year. And we knew that this was going to be a lighter pastel cover. We decided to go with a shot of a woman rather than a man, because women sell better than men, and we know that the newsstand buyer is a woman, so she could identify with this woman. We didn't want to show any nudity, but we did want it to say body, and we wanted it to say a real person. Like 2 years prior to this, we did another health cover in September, which was a black and white silhouette of a dancer, a woman leaping, and because it was backlit, you couldn't really see. It was like a black figure, sold very, very well for us. So we wanted to evoke the idea of body, and we wanted to have somebody looking straight at us. And then the final example has to do with one of the things that Reader's Digest, one of the many things that we bring that's unique to the newsstand, and that is humor as part of our mix. To, again, remind this consumer that part of the reason they love Reader's Digest is because of those silly jokes, because of the fillers at the end of articles. So rather than trying to pander to celebrity or to constantly try to pander to women's service or health, to occasionally be sort of corny or silly or show that we have, that we own that family-friendly humor element. And so we wanted to modernize that idea, and in the November issue we sort of took an emoji approach to it. So we didn't want to have cartoons anymore because that feels a little old and stale. And this time we tried to take the celebrities who are funny and comedians and make emojis for them, and that sold very, very well. We also did some research around the timing of jokes. Our humor issue used to be the September issue. But we used Google Analytics, and we found out when most people search for knock-knock jokes or family-friendly jokes, and we saw that it spiked right around October and went through the middle of December. And that's because people are getting together with their families, grandma and grandpa are coming over, they want a joke that they can tell at the family dinner table. So we moved our humor issue to November and December.
Excellent. Now you get to talk, so you talked a little bit about the covers that were working, so just to be fair, what about the ones that maybe weren't as successful as you have hoped?
Okay, so one of the things I've done is I've tried to take those things like News from the World of Medicine, Laughter the Best Medicine, Everyday Heroes, Drama in Real Life, use those actual words as cover lines and as cover themes for us. This cover line, Laughter the Best Medicine, meaning health humor, tested off the charts. Both of these cover lines tested off the charts in all of the online research that we did. But what we did is we tried to pair it, we paired it with Travis Stork, who's one of the hosts of a television show called The Doctors. And so when you have that 1.5 seconds at newsstand, all you see is a health cover. All you see is a doctor standing there. Even though we tried to make him look like he's laughing at a joke, look like he's funny, we tried to show, with the doodles, we tried to show that it was a humorous cover, it was a lighter cover, but you don't have time for that newsstand buyer to process all that information at checkout. Readers, subscribers loved this cover, but it didn't sell, it didn't fulfill the health promise. It wasn't serious enough for the people to think, oh, credible health information, so those people didn't buy it. And it really didn't say funny clearly enough so that nobody bought it for the humor reason. That's And as much as I love purple, that's the reason there.
I also want to point out that's interesting, and you see that the sell-through at 26% on the newsstand, which is a 16% decline from traditionally, that means your average is much, much higher. So, and even at the checkout, with all the different number of pockets that you actually have in the United States and Canada, you're still able to achieve a very high sell-through as compared to the national average, which we just heard about.
Right.
So there's still opportunities out there to actually be successful, not only in total units, but even on sell-through as well. So.
Yeah. And then the October issue, this is a mystery to me. We, again, like I say, we test, not only do we test cover subjects with our readers and with newsstand buyers, then we test 3 versions of, in terms of the language, how would we approach that, 3 versions of the cover line. And we tested Kindness of Strangers, True Stories of Random Acts, endlessly, and it was the highest performing cover story in the last 3 years. But we think there are 2 things that happened. First of all, the cover line, because the power of that story is so strong, the cover line is important, and it just didn't pop enough. If I could do it again, I would make that cover line black, first of all. Second of all, we think there might be something, Josh, you might be able to help me here, seasonally with our October issues. They've always done poorly for us, we think, and our September issues have always traditionally sold very well for us. So in a land of people who are buying maybe 4 issues at newsstand, they bought the September issue, they usually buy the September issue, and maybe they usually don't buy October, no matter what we do.
Right,
So.
and again, just as I stare at it, and I'm sure everybody looks at it and might have a little bit of a different thought on it, but I see the vibrant colors, they pop off the page, I see flowers, and I'm thinking spring.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the first thing that comes to mind is this is a spring
off-season.
concept.
Yeah, I was
Right.
trying to tap into the orange pumpkin thing that happens on the newsstand, but yeah, it didn't.
Right. What I'll tell you is, before we all got up here, I said, I got to send some questions so they can think about things, and then I sent a couple of questions to the group, but I kept a few to myself. So we'll just see when we get out to that point if everybody is on their A game today, because I'm hoping we can get to the point where I can surprise you a little bit and we'll get to some really interesting things that maybe you hadn't considered. And I do want to go back to a couple of covers from Reader's Digest specifically because I think that there's a really interesting concept as it relates to the testing. And I want to challenge the editors on this panel to really consider, how do you test? Who are you reaching? And is that person you're reaching an average newsstand consumer?
That's right.
Right. Good. And now we'll move to, if I can get Hubert.
I'm back again, sorry.
There you go.
As CEO, I dabble in everything a little bit. So
There we go.
There's
Brought
one
up your
employee
two.
at Bauer, and it's Hubert.
So I have your 2 covers here, Hubert.
let me start with that question, how do we test? We don't. Because what you just described, it tested off the charts, and then you have the worst sale ever. This is exactly what I experienced 150 times, and I said, okay, no more testing. So since I'm not the editor, of course, I don't have that intimate relation to the covers as you do. So what I would like to describe is how we work together, how I work with my editors to create content, covers, and what market research we use to help us make our decisions. So when we launch a title, typically we create what we call a brand essence. And that basically describes what is this magazine all about. And we describe an ideal reader. Now, this is not a real reader. There's little demographic information in there. It is really a psychographic construct. And we try to sum up in one sentence what is the main thing that makes this magazine different from the rest. So for In Touch, for example, that was, In Touch is like watching TV. If you think back at that time, People magazine had 20-page cover stories, and there were maybe 2 photos in there. And one night I was watching TV, an entertainment show, and I thought, this is what a celebrity magazine should look like. So it's like watching TV, very simple. Now, working with the editors, I think in a lot of companies probably there's this church-state separation. I don't accept that because, yes, the cover is an editorial product, but it is also a marketing instrument, and it is the most important one. So, as CEO, I want to have a say with what happens with the cover. I typically get involved basically when the cover is ready to ship. And I think what happens is, you know, as an editor, you spend sometimes months of preparation, then days of intensive work on each cover line, selecting the right photo, coming up with the colors, etc. And there's always a point when you are just blind. And what I try to do, and it's weird, I mean, we have a soap opera magazine. I've never in my life watched a soap opera, so I cannot even talk intelligently about the subject matter. But I can ask a lot of stupid questions. And very often, that test before we really ship the cover leads to quite significant changes. And with this particular one here, so I'm here for Carol Brooks, who promised Samia she would be here, but she couldn't make it finally. Carol Brooks is the editor-in-chief of First for Women and also the editor-in-chief of Simple Grace. Simple Grace is a little bit less than 1 year old. And at some point I said, you know, I kind of like our covers. This was the typical cover, a hand. We always had a hand in the cover that holds something, a gem, flowers. It's nice, but does it really tell the consumer what this magazine is all about? How can we do this better? And Carol said, well, we could put Jesus on the cover. It already sounded weird. And then she came with this cover, and what I had expected was that it would maybe be a painting, some kind of a stylized Jesus. I did not expect a real person there. I said, are you sure? So we talked about this back and forth. And you know, one thing that I believe in is you got to have guts. You need to try out things. So we said, come on, this really shows the consumer what this magazine is all about. Let's do it. It can be a disaster, then we know this is not the way to go, but maybe it works. We didn't test it, we didn't do anything, we just did it. It was the best cover, the best issue we've had so far. So that brings me to the general question of what do we actually do? How do we determine what we put on the cover? We don't do any research. I don't believe in that research at all. I've seen people lie at focus groups in a way that is just ridiculous. So what our most important source of information is our own sales. And what helps us is, as I said before, 90% of our sales is newsstand. So if you have a good cover, a cover that connects with the reader that you're trying to address, then it sells. And we see huge deviations in sales. And if you can interpret those, you got it done. The second best information is what do competitors do, what works for competitors, but that is already problematic because no magazine is alike. I believe very much, so I have 2 women's magazines, Women's World and First for Women. I think they are very different from the other magazines in the category. So I cannot imitate what other magazines do, but I can interpret what works for them and see whether I can find a way to use that for ourselves. In addition, we look at sales of related products. That could be books, it could be basically anything that has to do with our subject matter. One thing that doesn't work, I had to learn that the hard way with teen magazines. I thought, shouldn't I be able to tell from sales of that artist? So somebody puts out a new song and it goes through the roof. Shouldn't that be a reliable instrument for us for the cover? Didn't work at all. Because there are unfortunately very successful artists who don't connect emotionally to your audience. So we stick to this little bit of information, objective information, and I believe in this.
Wonderful. So you bring up a really interesting point, and it's something that we're going to continue to talk about, which is how do you find some of the non-traditional data sources to help analyze what might work or not work? So that's a really good intro to that. Before we get to Brooke from Hoffman Media, I've heard the term the hummingbird cake a couple of times, and I told you I brought some magazines. Completely not coincidental. I have one of Brooke's magazines, which is, we've got a hummingbird cake on the cover, so I'm now going to find out what they are because I had no idea until now.
Sweet as a hummingbird's nectar, they like to say. Can y'all hear me?
All right, let me go back here and I'll pull up yours. All right, you're on.
So Eric did a great job earlier of introducing Hoffman Media. We don't really have to go too much more into that, but as Director of Editorial Operations, I oversee our 5 food publications. We have 2 new launches as of last fall, Bake from Scratch, and Josh flashed one of our special issues, Cake, and also Southern Cast Iron, Cooking with Paula Deen, Taste of the South, and Louisiana Cooking. So between all of those magazines and the 120 to 40 issues that we put on the newsstand each year, that includes regular issues and specials, there are coverage decisions to be made every single day. Covers are a large part of what I do. I work with the editors, the editorial teams, our test kitchen, prop stylist, you name it, on making the best decisions and analyzing. We have a lot of internal data that we use to do that, to see what's performed, to look at trends. We look at social media a lot as well, talking about testing. That's a interesting way to test how our audience does respond to a specific recipe, to different topics, to even different angles of photographs, which is something that I'd love to kind of have some conversation here too about as well. Do people respond better to a very low, intimate photo of food, or do they like the darling of the food world now, where we're seeing a lot of overhead photos? So. Those are, some of those ongoing daily decisions that we make. With the newsstand making up a large portion of our revenue, a good cover and a bad cover, they can mean a very big difference to our bottom line. And I try to educate all of our editors on how to make those good decisions. The cover is a sales tool, and we have to look at that as a business decision, excuse me. Instead of being emotional, as we often are as creative people, and being really passionate about an image, but is it a sales tool? Is it going to sell on the newsstand? So here are a few of our titles. These are some of our mainstays at Hoffman. Southern Lady, Victoria, The Cottage Journal, Tea Time, Taste of the South, Cooking with Paula Deen, and Louisiana Cooking. And we will move on to the next slide, just to show you some of our new launches in the fall of 2015. All of these are, luxury products. They have that great paper that we've continued to talk about. They're $12.99 on the newsstand. They are premium products. And we can have a cover discussion here. This is one of the covers that I wanted to talk about, in direct relation to angle and to testing. Before we launched this brand last fall, we actually launched a social media account on Instagram for it before it ever hit newsstands. It was called, it's called the Bake Feed. And through this engagement with our audience on Instagram, we, got into all these conversations with home bakers, these home enthusiasts, that they're really proud of what they bake, and they're going to slice those loaves open, and they're going to take this shot looking directly into it, so you can see those air pockets and all that gloriousness, the crumbs falling on the table. So this is kind of an example of how engagement through social media led us to make this cover decision for the spring issue of Bake from Scratch.
Wonderful. One of the things I want to point out, Bake is a title that hasn't been out for very long, but it's a title that, quite honestly, is more than just the magazine content itself. When you look at the cover and you can get invited to actually pick it up, once you pick it up, it's an experience. There's a texture. You feel immersed as soon as you pick this thing up, because as soon as you feel the cover and the texture and you start to look at it, you really quickly get an idea of what the editorial team, the research, the art directors, you really feel for what the product is. So I feel like we need to consider what's the consumer going to really think about when they actually pick up this magazine, because part of it is attracting them so that they will pick it up, and then the next part of it is, what do they feel? And that becomes part of the entire experience, which is why I think a title like Bake is going to have a very, very long life, because people are going to feel very attached to this product, because when they pick it up and they feel it, they realize that all of the work and the passion that goes into making the product. And this is one of the titles that I actually feel that comes through very easily. So, and now we have our friend Josh from Success Magazine.
Hi, yeah, this is my first ACT conference. I'm glad to be here, glad to be back in Oxford. I'm actually a 2008 graduate of Ole Miss, so thank you, Dr. Husni, for the education, and you're welcome for the tuition money. When I went to school here, I actually wanted to be a sports writer, and I did that for a few years. My first job out of school, I'd had some internships when I was here, but my first job was covering the Dallas Cowboys. Did a lot of long form stuff. The team had a in-house magazine, and of course the game day programs. I wrote a lot of features for that, and eventually realized that they're a football team and not a media property, and so I wasn't going to go very far with that. And an opportunity opened up at Success, which is also based in Dallas, pretty close to my home. And I became the features editor there in 2012 and editor-in-chief last October. Success, if you're not familiar with it, is a 119-year-old brand. It was founded by one of the forefathers of like the personal development movement, which later included people like Dale Carnegie, Napoleon Hill, and today includes folks like Tony Robbins is probably the most famous. It's always been a personal development and entrepreneurship type magazine service for business leaders, business owners, and people who are aspiring to be business owners. My role there since I became editor-in-chief, of course, includes a lot of cover responsibilities, working with our founder and CEO, who, like you, Hubert, definitely wants to be involved in the cover selection process. Not as much from a design standpoint as having a say in the personalities that represent us, because with a name like Success, everyone you put on the cover is, it's a tacit endorsement of everything about them, basically. And so we have, at different times, tried out concept covers and illustrations and things like that. We won an award for illustration in 2011, and it was our worst selling cover ever. So the trophy's nice, but we're not going back to that well. By and large, our success from month to month is based on how much our target reader can identify with the person on the cover. And so much so that, in fact, when we redesigned, with the first issue of the redesign was October 2015, we downsized cover lines. We went completely minimal. We're down to just 4 cover lines. And it's really sort of the idea was to capture, as I think someone said, the essence of our brand. And basically it is playing off that 120-year legacy, and it's simple and classic, and trying to tell a story on our cover and giving some room to the face for that month of the magazine. And the other thing about our redesign is basically now every issue is a single topic issue, and so the person who's on the cover and the 4 cover lines that we do have need to make that clear, and while also sort of capturing the kind of tent poles of what our readers come to us for: motivation, inspiration. It's not just a business magazine. We also advocate, happiness and health and personal growth and purpose in your life. So all those types of things need to be expressed on the cover, and we try to do that. We've had really great success within the last year. Both our subscriptions and our newsstand sales are up 20%. Digital subscriptions are up 50%, and a lot of that, and I know Josh will show it here in a minute, is based on the smash hit of our January 2015 cover, which was Tony Robbins, and it just happened to be a timing thing. I think when you're dealing with personalities, first of all, I'm very jealous of all of you who get to put cakes and party pictures on the cover. That would be a lot of fun. Celebrities can be a big pain in the ass. I mean, just being able to book one who fits with your brand, being able to get access to them, being able to get them to play along, to help you promote on social media and things like that when the issue drops. It's really difficult, and especially when there are when you're not just taking who you can get, when you're trying to identify the exact right people, and I think that's very important for us to do. The Tony Robbins issue was just a great hit, and I think is because of timing. He, as sort of the primary thought leader, which is a term that a lot of you are probably familiar with. I don't know if I like it, but in kind of our personal development entrepreneurship space, he had not had a book in 8 or 10 years, but he was still the most known figure in the industry, and he was on our cover right before his new book came out. People didn't know a lot about what the book was going to be, and we got a chance to scoop our competition a little bit, and I should say that that's very important for us too. Although we're in the same set as like Inc. and Entrepreneur and Fast Company, we're not so much a business how-to magazine. People will over and over and over again go to our competition for that sort of thing. They come to us for the personal growth opportunity of how they can learn to be better, and in the long run, that will, if the founder or CEO of the business is better, then the idea is the business, of course, succeeds as well. So Tony Robbins was a great hit. I would say that over the rest of 2015, at least half of the other covers were slightly to a good bit above our average. We did have a couple sort of average, and then 3 that underperformed. And more often than not, it was based on how much our readers could identify with what with the cover figure and the level of access and promotion that we got after the newsstand date.
Perfect. So as we get into the panel and the questions, and certainly as you have any questions, please we'll get the microphone to you, and you can ask questions of the panel, just not before me, because I have a few that I absolutely have to get to. So I'm going to start by saying we talk a lot about what works on a cover, and I think it's equally as important to make sure that from the editorial side, we reflect as well on maybe what didn't work. So I'm just going to start with you, Josh, and I'm going to bring up a cover that maybe wasn't as successful, and maybe we can talk a little bit about, you know, you talked about Tony Robbins, and it's clear if you hit that exact mark, what can work and how well and how powerful it can be. And after we get through the sort of juxtaposing these two covers, we can bring up some of the sales indexes, and really what Tony Robbins did was just phenomenal. But as you look at the March cover, what do you think what stands out from you, or what can you learn as you reflect back on this and going, okay, maybe this wasn't as successful, or where did we miss our mark?
Well, one thing that we, knew going in, that is actually, sorry, I hope I sound all right. If you can't tell, and it's just a really tiny line there, that's Jimmy Johnson, the NASCAR figure. And going in, we knew that sports figures haven't sold very well for us in the past, but this was an opportunity for great access, and we thought great timing. It was the March issue, of course, is on newsstands right before, in February, right before the Daytona 500, sort of the Super Bowl of NASCAR. And we had hoped that sort of that timing would play well for us. With our redesign, in going for that simple and classic and really different from the rest of our set kind of look, the cover lines are very minimalistic. And this one, it's a departure from what we have done since the rest of the redesign, where you've obviously gotten a very clear picture of the person's face. In this instance, we assumed that most of our readers wouldn't know who Jimmy Johnson was anyway. And so the best way to illustrate what we were trying to go for, and this is sort of a competition-themed issue, was to just feature the eyes really prominently. And I think that the biggest issue that we ran into, because the other issues since the redesign, even with the minimalistic cover lines and even the muted background and simple photography, there really hasn't been any dip in per issue sales. They've been steady to what we had been before the redesign. But with this one, I think that we ran into just the sports buzzsaw, that our readers are less interested in athletes, and especially NASCAR. One thing that we could have done in the panel before, there was a lot of talk about capitalizing on trends and unique opportunities. We did not add extra issues throughout the South where there's a larger following of NASCAR. We didn't sell the issue at races. It's just a missed opportunity. There's not a lot of people who would be in search of a business magazine who would go into Barnes & Noble and pick up a business magazine with a NASCAR driver on the cover. So we gave it a shot, and we do have more athletes coming up, actually.
Okay.
Our May cover, it's on newsstands right now, and I think it'll do much better, is Michael Strahan. Sometimes you just get fortunate with timing.
Yeah, couldn't have been better.
Yeah, he left his show with Kelly Ripa yesterday, and so everybody run out and buy one.
And that's interesting. So back on the other side, back on Tony Robbins, so you said, look, we got lucky, this was perfect timing. One of the concepts in sort of covers and designing and trying to attract consumers that's constantly brought up is there an added value that we can give? We talked about having bonus pages earlier and things like that. I have in my hands now a puzzle book. It comes from our friends in the UK, and you may not see it, but there's a couple of important things that are on here. One of them says, win a cash prize. The other one is, it has a pen. So you're doing crossword puzzles. It has a pen included in every single issue. And then when I look at the top of your Tony Robbins issue, I see reach all your 2015 goals with a free CD. How much do you think the free CD or that extra added value has, generally speaking, and then maybe on this cover in particular?
We've been trying to kill the CD for several years. It cost us way more than anything else that of course is involved in publishing the magazine. It's expensive, and there's still on every issue we have that little added value line. It probably could stand to be a little bit bigger. The fact is that the people want the CD. We would think that in an age when you're your card more and more often, if you're buying a new one, doesn't even come with a CD player. So why would you want a CD to begin with? But we just got survey results in the last week or two that, and the question was, how would you like to get this audio? It's going to be free if you buy the issue anyway. And 60% of the people still say they want the CD. Either they're trained to it, or they, our readers are by and large older, so maybe they're not listening to podcasts, which we just got involved in that area as well. I think over time that probably is going to change, and we will be able to save some costs on binding the CD into each issue. But yeah, from the very beginning, since our parent company bought the title 9 years ago, that's been a added value that's been really important to us.
Perfect. So going back, I'm going to pick on somebody else now a little bit. I'm going to pick on Brooke, and I want to talk about Cottage Journal a little bit. So I've got 2 Cottage Journals covers up here. And before we do, just take a look at this, and if one of them performed very well on the newsstand and one of them performed well under the normal average, does anyone want to raise their hand for summer 2015 performed better? Raise your hand. Okay, a little more than half. And who thinks autumn 2015 performed? Wow, that's pretty split. Brooke, what do you think?
We do traditionally really well with our fall publications. I think, this is a national publication, but everybody we're dreaming about fall all summer long. We dream and we dream and we dream about it.
So
also, it's such an emotional cover.
What's that?
It's such an emotional cover. Come home to cozy comfort. Exactly. And I can see that on the picture. So to me, this is it's really nice.
And I think too, with, the title being cottage, you see just a little touch of a door. On the summer cover, you don't get that full cottage feel. You're kind of just welcoming somebody home, like in the smallest little way. But this is so much more bountiful and inviting.
So you're right. So the fall cover definitely did perform a lot better. So looking at the summer cover, is summer always going to be doomed, or is there something that you can do to sort of revitalize or try to reattract that consumer during that period? If you say summer is always weaker and fall is always a little bit stronger, what do you think about, or what do you consider from the editorial side for your covers to try to engage people at a time where maybe they wouldn't naturally pick up the magazine?
Yeah, I think it's coming up with, different themes, and that's something that we do with a lot of our publications. Look at, a time of year that traditionally is weaker and come up with a concept that, truly makes that time frame work. For another brand, another example, Taste of the South, we traditionally had, a very weak newsstand sell for, our January, February issue. And several years ago, we, made a decision to make that our annual cast iron issue. Well, it became the highest selling issue of the year and has remained that way for 4 to 5 years now. So I think a lot of times it's just rethinking what that focus is for a particular time.
You've got a pretty good lock on that cast iron category, so don't let that secret out too far.
Right.
All right. We'll do one more. I'm going to particularly pick on Liz here. We talked about that 2014 cover a little bit, but so you have a couple of covers here. Everyone saw earlier, if you had to sort of look between the September issue and then the February issue, since we've already talked about the good ones, we can all guess which one wasn't as strong. The thing I want to talk about on the September cover is sort of when you do your studies and your research and trying to figure out what works, is there a difference between what a subscriber wants to see and what a newsstand buyer wants to see? And sort of how do you figure that out?
Absolutely. September is traditionally one of the biggest sellers of the year. So I usually go with the best cover concept, and I really try to sell as many covers. I try to go with something visually that will be very strong, even if it might not be ideal for the subscriber. 2 years ago with that dancer who was shadowed, again, the best-selling issue of the year, but subscribers didn't really like it as much. It felt a little cold. Same with this response. They loved the story, but the cover itself didn't satisfy subscribers as much. We heard from many male subscribers who said, "Why did you pick a woman?" We heard from older women, "Why did you pick a young woman?" We heard from young women, "Why isn't she smiling?" We heard from athletes, "Why is she a dancer?" We just couldn't win. But what we wanted to do was match, to Hubert's point earlier, match the line to the image. And so we didn't want a smiling, sort of model looking ahead. We wanted to evoke the sense of caution or worry. So this we thought was a very beautiful look. I thought the eye lock was strong. But she's not unhappy, but she's somewhat more serious.
Serious, yeah. So, and this is something that, and Syd talked a little bit last night, the difference between the newsstand buyer and that subscriber, and trying to appeal to both of them at the same time. Do you have any thoughts on the differences and how you sort of try to appeal to both people at the same time with your product?
Sure.
Some covers of yours we can talk about too.
Well, I don't have examples here, but I mean, I think one thing with the newsstand buyer is, often you're trying to capture them. You've got that incredibly short window. We sell a lot of copies in grocery stores. So when you're thinking about a food cover, it needs to be something that they would make like that night. So that's something that's top of mind. That's not as big of a concern for the subscriber. But with that newsstand buyer, if it doesn't have that immediacy, if it's not something that they can go home and cook, that's just with a food cover, then it's typically not going to perform as well. But I will say that when I'm thinking about a subscriber cover, people have different opinions about this, and some people think that with the subscriber cover, the cover lines aren't as important, they don't matter as much, you can just go with a beautiful image, and they'll be happy with that. But I always think about somebody who is going to their mailbox, and they're getting their issue, and they're walking back, maybe they're walking back down their driveway, and I want to have those cover lines on there that are going to engage them, and they're going to make them want to stop everything that they're doing and go back and sit down on the couch and read that magazine. So, I think that the cover lines really do matter for that subscriber, and you want to grab them, and you want to really pull them in and show them as much value as you possibly can.
That makes sense. So I have a couple of...
Oh boy, okay.
I told you there'd be surprises. This is the way it has to work. So before we get into this, so we have January 2015 and October 2015. Who wants to say stronger issue is January? Raise your hand. Not very many. And stronger issue is October. Most folks. So Syd, before we actually show the results, which I'm sure you know, so if you had to sort of take these covers, pick either one of them, how do you identify what attributes or elements on the cover you think move people, so that you can sort of isolate them and go, okay, so if I could recreate soups and stews, I know that's going to work. Or people don't like little spaces, or they don't like this element on the cover. How do you sort of segment that for there's so many things happening on any cover at one time, but obviously there are certain things that are sort of go-to every time we go for your 4 S's like you described earlier. But when you look at some of these covers, what are some of the things that go through your mind as far as isolating what is important for the consumer to consider?
So, well, I'll speak to slow cooker. So, slow cooker is just a phenomenon that just continues. I mean, everything that we do that we put slow cooker on sells well. It is unbelievable. I mean, we've thought that we could literally put like a bowl of dog food and put slow cooker as the cover line, and it would sell. We found out that when you put something that looks a little bit like a bowl of dog food and you put the cover line slow cooker on it, it doesn't necessarily sell that well. So this was not the most attractive image, but we thought it was, and for some reason, and We wanted something to look like it came out of a slow cooker, which is a challenging thing because most things that come out of a slow cooker don't actually look that good. They taste great, and this was great. But, so we wanted it to look true to the topic. But the other thing that's really key about this cover is we did an overhead shot. And Brooke mentioned this, and it's the trend of really the past few years. All the food magazines are shooting food directly overhead. They think that that's like the hip thing to do, and we decided to take a chance and try it as well. It does not work for Southern Living, and for some reason it makes it kind of, I don't know, it puts the food at a distance from you. It's a little colder, it's less approachable, and there's something about, for us, coming in at like a 3/4 angle that just consistently performs better. It's much more inviting. It's not taking food as like an art object. It's like you can sit down and have a meal.
So if the overhead isn't seeming to be as engaging, why do you think it's become a trend?
I don't know.
I think you have to look at the demographic too of who's purchasing Southern Living, who's purchasing a lot of our magazines. I mean, we do have an older reader in that 45 to 65 age group, and I think some of these covers that we're seeing with more successful overhead food shots, they have a younger audience.
Yeah, but I don't see it working. I mean, you look at like a Bon App or something, and I don't see them blowing it out of the water on the newsstand, and not with these overhead shots that they're consistently doing. It's a very kind of Instagram thing. I mean, you see a lot of that. It's kind of arty, and art directors want to do it.
Right. That makes sense.
And it's more contemporary.
It's more contemporary. It definitely is. But yeah, it does not work for our audience.
Well, I think, and everybody can kind of guess the sales are there. You're right. So slow cooker not as successful, and then ready for fall again.
And this one, look, I spoke about seasonality, and I think you've just, it's the same thing with your cover. The fall is a huge time for us. And when it is fall, we want to hit them over the head. We want that cover to scream fall. I mean, that's why there's so many pumpkins on that stoop. I mean, you look like you're going to break your leg coming out of the door. But we want people to feel like this is fall, and that's what I'm going to get out of the issue. And so it did very well.
Awesome. And we have one more, and we're getting close on time, so I have one more. And obviously, if there's any questions, raise your hand anytime, and we'll get that around. Want to do that now? We'll do that right now, and then we'll finish up at the end. So, Mr. at the top, Via Corsa, yes.
I've got a question for Josh. Josh, you're a celebrity, so it's not a real seasonal cover that you have, concerns with, let's say, Southern Living. How do you balance cover to cover with celebrities?
We definitely don't want to get demographically is a big part of it. So we wouldn't want a string of white men in a row, or a string of blondes in a row, even something like that. You ideally, something like Jimmy Johnson on March, when the Daytona 500 is about to hit, would work well for us. I know, to use another athlete example, like we really wanted and weren't able to get Jordan Spieth right before the Masters, right? Like that seemed like perfect timing, and we worked it for a long, long time. And that's why I say celebrities are a pain in the ass, because you might think you're going to get them and then you don't. We wouldn't want to go actor 2 months in a row if we could avoid it. We would we'd ideally like a nice balance between entrepreneurs, because they routinely do pretty well for us. And the thought leader types like Tony Robbins, or authors like John C. Maxwell, who was on our December cover, mixing those in with people from other walks of life as well.
Yes, in the back.
No, go ahead, shout. I had a question, two quick questions for Liz. One, you mentioned reaching out to the new generation. I met the editor
Well, I like to say that Reader's Digest is a psychographic, not a demographic. But the reality is we're part of people's homes. And when, our 52-year-old reader right now was often gifted the Reader's Digest when he or she first bought their first home. And we find that gift giving is a big part of this, and it's Reader's Digest subscription is the annual Christmas gift from the mother and the father. And because we hadn't marketed to our subscribers, we lost 20 years we lost a whole generation of people who weren't getting that magazine, and it wasn't part of their home. So we're not looking for 25-year-olds, although there are we have more millennial readers than Vanity Fair. We have more millennial readers than the New Yorker, probably simply because of the sheer size. But we're looking for the next generation of 40-somethings, the next home. Yeah.
Follow-up question. The size of Reader's Digest is very unique, being small, and when you're competing on the newsstand, obviously it doesn't stand out as much. I've seen at some newsstands you buy separate places. So have you ever thought about changing the size? What would you say about the size in comparison to other larger magazines where it doesn't stand out as much?
We would never change the size. We've defined what a digest size magazine is. It's part of what the brand stands for. So from a brand standpoint, it doesn't make sense to change it. Also from financially, it just doesn't make sense because we would have to buy all new racks, and we've invested in the digest size rack. So it's as much as I was also the editor. I'm an editor of little magazines. I was the editor of Prevention before. So we've looked at changing the trim size. And for many people, that small magazine says older. It says my grandmother's magazine because both magazines are a little bit older. But for many people, it's an asset. I can put it in my bag. I can carry it around. So it's just not worth changing.
The trade-off. And I saw another question, but I want to sort of interject because you brought up an interesting point, which is sort of, the general concept of changing the product over time. So I'm going to ask the group, sort of just anyone who thinks they want to speak up and answer this question, which is, can you describe just one change that you made that turned out to be very successful for you, and sort of how did you decide we wanted to make this editorial cover change? And I see a hand up there with Liz. Yeah. So and why did you do it, and how did that turn out?
I will say that we did, in addition to the bookmark cover, we did change the paper stock with the redesign, and we went from glossy to a matte paper, which increased the plot factor that Syd was talking about. So we had fewer pages, but there was thicker paper, so it felt bigger. And the matte is easier on the eye for our older reader. It's an easier magazine to read. I can't even read some of the glossy magazines. You have to kind of go like this. So we sold it. We're very transparent in my editor's letter when we redesigned. We talked up the new paper and how it was, we had tested it. It's easier to read. It's easier on the eye. So we saved money and there was a consumer benefit.
So it's a win-win everywhere. Anyone else want to tackle that one?
Can I just say something else that she did? Not that I did, but maybe you mentioned this earlier, but I think, changing the size of readers. I mean, right before you, I think digest
was bigger.
Was the big word, and I think making that flip, I mean, that was so noticeable to me. And you made the reader the star, and it was a magazine about reading. And I thought that was a great move and a great change.
Thank you. Many rounds on the tail of the R. You can imagine the committee meetings.
I see we're running out quickly. We have a question right here towards the front.
Real quick question for you, Liz. Geico tag, has there been any, what's the reaction to that?
We test it because we want to give Geico feedback. There's a high brand awareness and a lot of gratitude, quantitative and qualitative. I've gotten letters that we forwarded to Geico. Thank you for the bookmark. It's so helpful. I usually ripped out your pharma insert cards and used it as as a bookmark. There is a small but very vocal part of the readership that hates it. Because once you tear the perforation, then it can rip, and so. And it's interesting, some people rip it, use it as a bookmark, some people don't.
David?
I've got a question for you as well. What about something crazy on the change in the size of the magazine to compete in a space where you can't compete right now? So it gets lost in a mainline magazine. So what about a B-size special that said, you know, something on health or something on well-being, something on retirement or something on, just because you can utilize the brand for other things beyond, and I'm not saying that it would be it's certainly not a replacement of this, but it's a brand extension.
Yeah, we've done bookazines. We had an SIP line, we had digest-sized SIPs, and then we had a bookazine line. But the company folded it in 2000, the last time it all imploded was at 2012 or whatever. They just weren't making money. The health ones did, the humor did. We just tried we worked with Topics Media on some bookazines, and we did Bob Hope, and we just haven't had that success at the $13 price point that some of the health and fitness and food magazines have at bookazine. But I think that's very smart. And I think there's potential with nostalgia. One of Trusted Media Brands also owns Reminisce magazine, and I think there's a nexus of emotion and this age group and nostalgia that could work. And so maybe if it's not the Reminisce brand, maybe you use the Reader's Digest branding and tap into some of the nostalgia content.
All right, last question, because we're all very hungry.
Very quick for Brooke. Of your 132 titles a year in the 10 or 12 magazines, what's the ratio of theme issues or topic issues in any 12? How many of those 12?
We really do try to theme most of our issues now. It's compelling for readers, and I think it's something that whether it's the French issue, the Italian issue, the cast iron issue, allowing that vertical content. I think it's just a nice editorial thread that gives straight. So we do a lot of thematic issues.
Great. So as we wrap up, I want to do two things. Number one, I want to thank our panelists for coming up here. And then number two, a reminder, if anyone wants to sort of touch and feel and get a feel for some of the things that are going on in the newsstand, I have a variety of covers here that we can look at. And it's really fun, really immersive, and you start to see the entire product that's coming out of the newsstand. So enjoy your lunch. Thank you again to the panelists, and enjoy the rest of the conference.